For our Viz 216 class, we are continuing on with exercises, and we're going to go into exercises 2 and 3, which include a custom pattern, which is a custom pattern fill for this. And then we also want to do this little clock, which has a default pattern in the back, one that's provided by Illustrator, and then this clock in the foreground. First step is to right click on the image above and download it to use it as a template so that you can recreate the boxes 3 and 4. And then you'll upload just your AI file here. So let's get to it. Now, what I would recommend is go ahead and open up your exercise 1 and 2 file and then save it as exercises, say 3 and 4. That way I'll know and be able to quickly identify what this is. Make sure you name it properly. It would be your last name, your first initial, and then EX3-4. So make sure you save those properly. Now, the first step in getting ready for exercises 3 and 4 is to include the graphics that were downloaded. What we'll want to do is place in the template layer, which we already have a template layer from exercise 2, and turn that on. We'll place in that template layer the image for exercises 3 and 4. You'll unlock the template layer, click on the template layer to activate it, and then go to File, Place. The keyboard shortcut is Shift-Control-P or Shift-Command-P. And I'm going to find the exercise 3-4 file and place it. I've already downloaded all those. Now, what you want to do is you want to place it in the upper left-hand corner so it'll kind of align to the artboard, more or less. And now you can see it. Once you're finished with that, lock that template layer. Now, if your template layer is much lighter in color, because by default it oftentimes does do that if you actually use it as a template layer. Let's talk about template layers for just a second. I named it a template layer, but let's actually make it a template layer. I double click on it and I choose template. It will automatically dim the images to 50%. That's part of the reason why I didn't bother to make it a template layer, and since we're not printing something, we're not doing output, template layers do not output. So here's what's going to happen if I do a template layer. It dims the image by typically 50%. So it's going to lighten these images. And when that happens, then I don't get the opportunity to work with accurate color. It looks like my Illustrator's given me some problems this morning. So we'll just see if it's going to do something as simple as dimming this layer as a template layer. And it has. So that gives me not the accuracy of color. Okay, so sometimes I will go into my template layer and just not make it a template and then just lock it. Okay, or just put the dim at 100%. Now, I have locked exercises 1 and 2 attempts, and I'm going to click on exercise 3 to activate it. Again, keeping in mind my template layer is locked. Now, my squares aren't necessarily aligned with the template layer squares, but I'm okay with that as long as you're using rounded cornered perfect squares. All right, so let's talk about this image. Let's zoom in. How do we create these elements? And this is a little bit low res, but it'll work out. All we need here is one tree that we will likely copy and paste and use a couple different times, but then the snow underneath is going to look a little different on each one. And we'll only need one snowflake. So let's start with the snowflake first. Now this uses a hexagon shape, it uses a couple of them actually. And then it branches off with these little, frosty bits there. So let's go ahead and get our polygon tool. And I suppose we could snap to grid and that kind of thing. However, we'll see what happens if we don't. Now, I am going to draw from the center out on this snowflake using the Alt or Option key and pulling and dragging. Now it does look like snap to is on. If it weren't, I would be perfectly centered on that. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go to view and let's see what we have on our guides. Looks like snap to grid is on. So I'm going to turn it off for now. I think we can do this without the grid, without snapping to. So I'm going to pop this in the center again, hold down the Alt or Option key and Shift and draw a perfect little hexagon. Now, this has been filled with none and stroked with white. And if we move it off to the side, we can see that it's been rotated. Now it's been rotated. We'll have to figure out how many degrees of rotation. So I'm going to make sure on transform, the center reference point is chosen, which it is. And I'm going to double click on my rotation tool. And, you know, we have 360 degrees around a circle and we have 6 sides, but we only want to rotate it half of that. So we'll, I know this sounds crazy, but we'll say divided by 3, see what happens, do the preview. And it's like, well, that didn't work. So 360, let's do divided by 12. So that sounds odd, but we're doubling the 60 degree angle or that angle. So we doubled the 6 sides to get the spot in between. I don't know if you understand that or not, but if we just did a divided by 6, it won't move at all. Divided by 3, it didn't either. So divided by 12, 6 times 2, got us a 30 degree rotation. Now, if you're not really comfortable with geometry, this may be a little problematic for you, or the art of geometry. So there's that one. And now we're going to draw another one. We could simply copy and paste the one we already have, or we could just go ahead and hold down the Alt key, the Shift key, and click and drag and have a second one done. Now, I will occasionally turn off the template just to kind of see what's going on. Now I can't really see what's going on because I don't have any color behind there. So just for a quick second, I'm going to just throw in, this is gonna be a temporary rectangle, okay? I'm just gonna throw in a rectangle and fill it with cyan. And then I'll send it to the behind the other object. So right click, arrange, and send to back. And it should do it to the back of the layer. Now we can see better what we have going on with the shapes and how they're reacting to one another. Go back to layers, turn back on my template. Now in this case, because I have that blue box, I may have to turn that off and on occasionally, just because of the fact that it's in the way of being able to see behind it. Now it does appear as if these are a little thinner on their strokes. So I might use like a 0.75 just to loosen that up a little bit. And it does appear that those do touch. So on the edges. So I am going to turn that on. Looks like they're pretty close. So pretty close. If they're not touching, I might click on one or the other. I'm going to click on the center one, double click on the scale tool here. I'm going to turn off scale strokes and effects because I don't want this stroke to get larger. And I'm going to put that about 105. Let's see what happens. Yeah, now they're touching. That feels better because this would be all combined and touching. Okay, now we're ready to do the we'll call them the limbs of the, I don't know, the spikes of the snowflake. Now, I typically like to draw these like straight up and down. So I'm going to go back into both of my polygons. Now I'm clicking on the target over here in the layers panel, holding down Shift key and clicking on the second one. I'm going to double click on the rotation tool. I'm going to get that so that points straight up. So it's a 30 degree rotation again. Now I'm going to, let's turn off this little guy here. Now I'm going to draw from the center out using just the line tool, a line from the top of about where those would rotate to, and hold down the Shift key so you draw straight and then make sure it aligns down to that anchor point, that path. If you feel like this is too short, you can always click on the anchor point at the end, may have to double click just to activate it. And you can move that up just a little bit just to make sure it's the right height. Now this should also be 0.75, and it is, but the end cap should be round to soften that up a bit. And now we're ready to work on the little items, the parts that fly out of here, the little frosty arms of this. So I'm going to grab the line tool again. And basically what I will do here is I will draw one side and then flip it. So we're going to hold down the shift key, and then that's going to give us a 45-degree angle. Now I don't know that that's what I used in the finished piece. Probably not. So, but it does help keep them all angled the same. So I'm going to pull that out, make it very long. And if you want to know, if you want to make sure your elements line up, you can draw another line from one anchor point to another. Now, you want that to be a separate line. Maybe I'll make that a black line and much thinner, just so we can tell the difference between it and what we intend to use. Let's make this black so we can see it, make it a little different. And this will kind of give us an indicator of where we need to stop and start our other lines. Now you could consider copying and pasting this path several times straight up. So I'm holding down the Alt and the Shift key, and I'm clicking and dragging it. And I'm going to hit Control D a couple times. And now I have 4 of them. They're all equally angled and equally spaced. So you have to be careful about how far you Alt click. If you click too far, just hit Control Z and try it again. Now I am going to want to pull this anchor point down. You want to keep it in line with the current angle. So we'll see if there's a way to do that. Just Control Z. Let's get this tip again. If I hold down the Shift key while I am pulling that, then, oops, I also held down Alt, so that copied it. Then that should keep it in line. So I'm clicking on the end, holding down the Shift key, then it will stay in the same angle that you intended. Okay, now I may go ahead and pull this black line up a little bit to the top of that piece. And then let's get the direct selection tool here. Get out of isolation mode. That's what happens when you double click. I'm going to straighten this up a little bit differently. I want that to stick out the top a little bit more. So as long as this aligns to the center, I'm good. Now I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to extend this out just a little bit. Again, you want to hold down the Shift key to ensure that those paths stay in line with the current angle that you have. Okay, now it's sticking out a little bit nicer. So I'm a little bit happier with that. And these again are 0.75. They could probably do a little more thinning down, but that's okay, as long as we get the idea of it. Now I am going to delete this path that I used as a kind of a guide. And I'm going to click on all of these 4 items. And I am going to group them and I'll flip them, mirror them. So that's under transform. So I'll go to object, transform, and reflect. And we're going to reflect it vertically and hit copy. Then I use the arrow key just to kind of get it over there. But make sure when you start clicking and dragging, you hold down the Shift key so it'll stay in line. And what you want to do is click on it and drag it until it hits the center of that line. And as long as you have smart guides on, it should work just fine. Okay. Now we are going to group the whole entire piece of the snowflake by clicking, holding down the Shift key and clicking on all the parts and group it. Now this may not perfectly align to the one below because I didn't use it, I should have rotated the reference, but guys, I'm just looking for something that is, pretty well geometrically perfect, but if it's not exactly the same angles, no big deal. Now I'm going to turn on the layer for the little blue color in the background, just to see what's going on. Now I'm going to rotate this from the center of these hexagons. I'm going to rotate it, and it's going to copy 5 more times. So I have this selected already. I'm going to grab the rotation tool and find the center of that. Now it's not indicating center as easily as I'd like it to. So sometimes I'll hit Control Y, and that may also help me with the center. Let's see where the center of this thing is. If I can't find center, yeah, this is a problem, guys. For some reason, the hexagon shape doesn't show a center. Well, gosh darn it, that's just a fussy thing. So I may temporarily draw an ellipse. There's the center. Now it's showing up, but I'll still draw an ellipse here. I'll get rid of it later, but circles always have centers. So I just held down the Shift key and clicked and dragged. So I'll delete him later. Now what I'm going to do is take this little segment, hold down the Shift key, or excuse me, not hold on the Shift key, grab the rotation tool, click on the center, or Alt click on the center. Don't forget that Alt, or on a Mac option. And the rotation should be double what it is, because the last time so it'd be 360 divided by 6. You got 6 segments, 360, which is the full around the whole entire shape, divided by 6, and it'll give me the perfect degree of rotation there. So I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to click Control or Command D until I have the full finished paths for the snowflake. All right, I should probably hit Control Y again so I can see what I've got. So there is more or less the snowflake. I'm going to get rid of this circle in the center because it is not necessary. Now, if I turn off this layer and look at the one below, it's pretty much, what it needs to be. With the exception of it needs to rotate now. So I'm going to grab but this rectangle in the back, grab all of the whole entire star. Let's group it. That's a good idea. Oftentimes when I group things, I'll name them as well. I call it a star, but it's a snowflake. Even though you group something, you can still name that grouped item. And we're going to rotate this from the center. So I'm going to grab the center rotation, hold the Alt key down. Actually, I don't even have to worry about that. We'll just double click on this. Don't even hold the Alt key down. And this will be a 360-degree rotation divided by, instead of 6, we'll do double that, 12. And let's see what it does. You see how it rotates, just so you get a half turn kind of. It's not even half turn, it's a 1/6 of a turn. I'm gonna hit OK, I'm not gonna hit copy. So there's my cute little snowflake. Now it's not exactly the same angle as the original as far as these branches go, but I am not particularly picky about that, okay? So we're not gonna worry about that. So there's one snowflake. That's all I need. I don't need to duplicate these. We are actually gonna create a pattern fill. Now the next thing we're gonna do is the tree. So let's get in here and get that done. So the tree is just it's just a geometric shape. You could probably draw a bunch of triangles, and as long as they're centered and stacked, you can get this thing done pretty easy. So I'm going to go ahead and get the polygon tool, and I'm going to click one time, and we're going to make this, instead of a 6-sided polygon, we're making it 3. Now it probably is not going to be the size that you need. So if it's not, just delete it and grab the polygon tool. And then you can start to click and drag. I'm holding down Alt and Shift because it looked like it might be a perfect rectangle, or I'm sorry, triangle. If it's not a perfect triangle, hold down the Alt key and click. And the only bad thing is you still want to hold down the Shift key because otherwise it'll rotate improperly. If we have to change the shape of that, we can deal with that later. So we're going to sample the color that's behind there. And so we have a fill of this dark color, And it looks like we may have to increase the size of this just a bit. And may want to have to hold down Shift so that way, and Alt from the center out. So that way it'll kind of stay in the position you want it. There we go. Now I will just simply Alt click drag this down to the next area, then hold down the Shift key and then the Alt key, and then shape this from the center out. And just kind of get this to build on top of itself. You do want this to be perfectly centered to each of the triangles. So you do be careful about that. So I'm going to Alt click and drag. And again, using the free transform tool, hold down the Shift key and then hold down Alt or Option and increase the size of that next one. And again, you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but I do want it to be absolutely geometric. Now, it looks like for some reason some things are disappearing. So interesting. So it's not copying them. So excuse me just for a second. Not sure why it's not copying them. So let's try this again. Alt click drag. Well, that's unusual, isn't it? It should be copying them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate it by clicking and dragging it down to the plus sign on the layers panel. That was odd. And then I'm holding down the Shift key to move it down. And again, holding down Shift and then Alt to increase the size of it. Yeah, my Illustrator doesn't seem to want to be functioning on some basic things. So I've got to watch that. And again, I'm going to keep on doing this until I get what I need as far as this tree done. Again, I do want some pretty perfect geometry. So make sure at the very least that these are perfectly stacked on top of one another. If you get them out of order, it's easy to get them back in order. I'll show you. I'm going to purposefully get these out of order. Resize this guy. So we're going to hold down Shift, Alt, and then maybe this is slightly off center. So if you get something off center, you can always click on all of the objects that you want centered and go to the Align panel. Make sure it's aligned to the selection and just center them. So that's another way to get, you know, make things easier for yourselves, is to use the Align panel. Now the cool thing is we only have to draw this. Oops, I just copied the whole thing. We only have to draw this tree one time, and we can copy and paste it a few different times for the other trees. So there's not any difference between this tree and the other ones, except for maybe we scaled them out, you know, proportionally different. So it's not anything really too different. Now I did stretch that one out just a little bit. Probably gonna have to stretch the one down below a little bit too. So we're just building this guy up by, you know, copying and pasting, Alt Shift dragging to make it bigger, and just work on down the line. Here's the final one. All right. And again, to get these all in line with one another, because they may be out of line. It looks like I'm missing another one. For some reason, my copy and paste is half working, half not. That's odd, very odd. Okay. I did just clean the keyboard. That might have something to do with it. You know, you don't want to clean your keyboard with a really wet towel or anything, or rag. And mine was not really soaked, but may have something to do with it. I don't know. I know better than to really, you know, do that with a super wet cloth. Sorry guys, I want to use the free transform tool more so than the scale tool, because the scale tool has not really been the easiest thing to deal with some of the updates. Okay, so let's align these centered. And oh my goodness, I'm telling you guys, it looks like this thing is not copying and pasting. So I'm seeing I'm missing some stuff. So this could be a struggle a little bit. And we don't like circles, do we? They're not fun when you're trying to watch a demonstration. Okay, so I'm gonna grab all these, go to the align point and center those. And I can turn off the back just to see what's happening here. And if I need to make some adjustments, I will, because optically this looks a little off. So I'm going to make a few adjustments. Now, you might argue that, hey, we could use a transform tool and copy and paste these and enlarge them. But yeah, I tried that, and they're not really the same percentage of enlargement. So that was a good idea if you had that idea. Like, why don't I just do a transform and then just have it copy itself, copy and move and resize. And again, great idea, just not necessarily working with this particular shape. Oops, I'm on the perspective tool. If you ever get on that perspective tool, hit escape. Because it's yeah, that perspectives tool. For some people, since you haven't used it, you're like, how do I get out of it? So that's escape. Escape. All right, so this is, looking pretty good. We'll just keep moving on here. So I'm going to group all this, and that way I can work with them together. Okay, so we're going to just thin that down just a little bit. All right, so we're going to group this object, make sure they're still aligned. Always align those, and object and group. Now, I suppose you could even merge them because they're all basically one solid item. So that wouldn't be a bad idea if I go to window and bring up my Pathfinder and merge those or unite them. Now it's one continuous shape. Now, if I want to edit the individual shapes, that would be a bad idea. But if it's good, it's good. Now, I'm going to save this. Make sure again, when you save this for the first time that you can save over exercises 1 and 2, I suppose, but I saved as exercise 3, 4. Now back to the layers. Let's take a look at what we have for our template. I'm going to turn off my path for just a second. What we have here is we have a repeat of that same tree 3 more times in different colors. So we're going to grab that tree. And here I will do object transform, and we're going to do a free transform each on this. Now I might want to fill that with a color first. In fact, I will do that. Let's go to edit, copy, and let's paste in front. Okay, that way we have a second one. Then we will go in and we'll transform it. Object transform each. Probably should color it too. Let's get the sampler and get the next color green. There we go. That way you can see the transformation, because if it's the same color as the one behind it, you won't be able to see it. So we're going to take this down a little bit. So on the horizontal, I'll take it down until, oh, I can't see the other one below it. I could turn that off. I'm going to take that down, just a little bit. So I've got 71%. I mean, we're just doing it till it looks good. And the vertical, it does look like it comes down a little bit as well. So I'm going to take the vertical down. Now you see how this is moving up from the bottom. The pieces that we have for our example have it pushed down. So we also want to move that down just a little bit. I always go the wrong way on this, don't you guys? So we're going to move that down just a smidge. Let's see, it's going to be a very small amount. So let's put 0.1 and see what happens. Wow, that's a ton. So I guess it'd be 0.01 and we'll work from there. So let's do a 0.05 and see where we get. Goodness, that's a tremendous, because this is so tiny, that's a tremendous amount. So 0.02 looks pretty good. And let's see, that tip is coming down maybe a little further than what I want. So let's change this to say a 95. There we go. And put this at a 0.0. I'm going to put it back at 0.01. Let's do a 0.015. There we go. That feels about right. And I'm going to hit OK because I don't want to copy it because I've already copied it and put it in here. So I hit OK. Now I could hit Control D and see what happens, and it should do another one. And then another one. Boy, that's really interesting. It's not copying. Oh, it's because I didn't tell it to. Okay, so let's go back to transform and let's go to transform each and just hit copy. It should be the same numbers. And now hit Control D again. That's why I wasn't copying. And then every other one or each one of these has a different color. So I'm going to sample the colors from the original. And finally, we should be pretty much done. Now these do appear as if they're coming down just a little farther than what I wanted them to, but they're going to be covered up by the snow. If you feel that it's a little too much, you can always take this free transform tool and pop it up a little bit. You can do that to a few of them just to feel like they're a little bit more organically managed. So because this is an organic object. So I'm just going to pop each one of these up just a little bit, just to make them feel a little bit better as far as the organics go. All right, so let's turn off the template and we'll see what we have. We have this tree shape, and the shape repeats itself several times to get this kind of color. Similar to what we have below. Not exactly the same, but again, I'm not so worried about it being exactly the same, but I do want this to be perfectly aligned and have geometry. We're going to group this and we're going to name it tree. Now, as far as the line below goes, we're just going to use the pen tool, click, drag, and finish. And we'll make this default fill stroke, but then we'll flip it and make the fill none and the stroke stays white. And what we'll do with that is we will make that a rounded end on the cap. And then we're going to thicken the line. Okay. In fact, I'm going to make this line black for a moment so we can see it. We'll thicken this where it needs to be thickened by using the width tool. The width tool kind of looks like a upside down little handlebar mustache. We're going to click near the anchor point or on the anchor point that we want to widen and widen that out. And then we can always click on another and narrow it if it needs to be narrowed. So you can control how wide and how narrow these are, the endpoints and the spots in between. Now, if you got to be careful not to go and click another thing, because then you get these really wobbly sort of like an amoeba or something. Click on the original anchor point that you wanted to play with and that you went in and adjusted and work on it. Try not to click additional points, in other words. Now I may go ahead and pull this out just a smidge. That would mean I'd have to pull this curve to make it look, oh, good. And that looks pretty good. A little bit more of a curve. And we want to fill this, or we want this to be stroked with white. And let's look and see what we have. Again, I'm going to go into my layers panel, turn off this layer, and close enough. Like this one pulled down just a little bit. Add more of a hill to it. All right. And we might even throw that into the group of with the tree. Just make sure that it is at the top of that layer. Now we're going to duplicate this tree layer a couple of times by clicking on it and dragging it to the plus sign. And since it's grouped, we can just simply move it. And we'll do that again, duplicate it and move it. Now, these trees have been modified to be maybe a little bit more squat. So I'm going to get my free transform tool and just start pulling this, pulling this down and making it similar to what we see over here on this tree, just to the right of it. kind of a little bit wider. Now we do have a problem in that scale, strokes, and effects was off. So I'm gonna hit Control Z a couple times. You can see that snowy little hill. It didn't resize, it stayed really thick. So before you do anything, double click on the scale tool, make sure scale, strokes, and effects is on, hit OK, and then go back to your free transform and transform it. Now you can see that the little hillside is nice and scaled. Now, ultimately, this may not matter because it's a different stroke anyway. So we might even flip the stroke and modify its width, that kind of stuff. So let's just get it in here, resize it roughly to the point where the tree is working. Just looking at the tree. Oops, not a rotation. We're looking at the tree and getting it roughly in the position it needs to be in. Now, obviously, this tree needs to go behind the first tree. And I'm going to turn off the template layer for just a second. Unfortunately, I can't see what's going on behind that tree, so I may borrow this rectangle again and turn it on. The one for the snowflake. And I can move that rectangle, assuming it's unlocked. And this is just so I can see behind there. Okay, so sometimes I'll do this just so I can see something. And this guy was going a different direction. I'm going to double click to go into isolation mode, and we're going to flip this. So object, transform, reflect. Hit OK. There we go. And we can always adjust its thickness and its position if we have to. So I'm going to double click to get out of this mode. Turn off the rectangle for just a moment, turn on the template layer, and let's see what we have. It's pretty close, but I do believe that this was pulled down just a smidge, and that gives that a little bit more of a twist to it. So there you go. And finally, we're going to deal with the last one. So we're going to resize it again independently of the others. Let's get this transform tool, free transform. Whoops. We're going to really mush it down. That one's really been kind of expanded or extended. Goodness, I don't want to rotate and I keep getting rotation, excuse me. Okay. So this guy's a much wider little fella, but not like too crazy wide. We're going to pop him in his rough position. And I may have to transform it just a little bit. Send him to the back of the foremost tree. Again, I'm going to turn on my little blue square just to see what I've got going on back there. And we'll see what this one just kind of dips down and comes up. So I'll have to adjust this little guy here. Again, I may have to go into isolation mode, so I'm going to double click on it. Pull it down so I can see what's going on. So yeah, he looks like he's maybe flipped the other way. So object, transform, reflect. We'll do this horizontally. Yeah, maybe. Looks like we've done some extra stuff on this one. And we'll hit OK. I'm going to pop him into position. We'll go ahead and transform him a little bit. Maybe bring him in just a smidge. I know it's kind of difficult to see what's going on when you have white on white. Again, if you have to, you can make it a different color temporarily just so you can see what's going on, because otherwise it is a little difficult to discern what's happening. So we're going to, I'm going to delete the anchor point at the end of this. And we're going to see what happens when we extend this anchor point out. Okay, we're almost there. Looks like I could use some finessing on the curve. And also with the width tool, I may need to narrow down a couple little things here. So let's see if I can get the width tool to even function. All right, well, it doesn't look like it really wants to, does it? All right, so, you know, close enough, right? There we go. Now, we only needed the one set of trees and the one snowflake for this. I do need to go in and put the little bits of snow in around the trees. These are just circles. Let me turn off, I'm going to turn off this blue. And these little dots are just circles. So I'm going to use the ellipse tool and hold down the Alt and Shift and just draw little circles without strokes. So this will be a fill of white and a stroke of none. And you want them about the size that they are in the finished piece. So I'll pop that one down there, hold down the Alt key, the Shift key. It's like it is copying now. It's hit or miss. And we're going to resize as we go. So some are bigger, some are smaller. It just looks more natural when you have a variety of sizes. And then I'm going to put another one there. Another one here. I'm just holding down the Alt key while clicking and dragging. I'll resize them here in just a moment. Just want to get them all in position. Probably be best to resize them as I do it. That way I don't get lost, but we'll just take a look here. He's about right. This one needs to be larger. So we'll just resize them as we need to. It's going to need appear to be larger just a little bit. I hold down the Shift key and the Alt key to center them from the center out, to scale them from the center out. Using the transform tool. Okay, so let's turn off the background and turn this little blue box on again. Again, the blue box is just there so I can see what's going on the white background. So we're going to get rid of this blue box later. Okay, so does it look good? That's the question. Looks pretty good. There's an awkward point of tension here, so I'm going to click on that and get that to be a little bit nicer. There we go. All right, so that guy's ready to go. Now, I'm going to turn off that blue box and turn back on the background graphic template. All right, so we're ready to create some patterning now. Usually I do have Snap to Grid on this, but we'll see what happens if we don't. You know, we can always learn. We can learn a hard lesson, I suppose. What I need to do is in this little blue box, I might as well use it. I need to make sure that it is filled with, let's say, this light blue that's behind the graphic. There we go. So now it's filled with light blue and stroke with nothing. Now this should be a perfect square. The bad thing is how do you make this a perfect square after you've already drawn it? Now I suppose you could try to go to object and shape and tell it to, let's see. Sorry guys, I'm trying to think if there's a way to, I'm thinking InDesign for a moment. Yeah, can't just make it a perfect square here. So I suppose I could delete it and then just get the rectangle tool and go roughly eyeball center and shift click out and get you a nice little square going on here. Now you know how big to make the square because of the height of the pattern. So from top to bottom. So I'm kind of more or less getting that to be aligned with the from top to bottom, and I held down the Shift key while I drew it so it would stay in proportion. So draw a square, bring it to the bottom, And then you probably want to go ahead and make sure it's just more or less optically centered to the piece. We can always move that if we have to later. Now we're going to duplicate this square and hold down the Shift key, Shift and Alt. We're going to move it down to beneath the snowflake. I keep wanting to call that a star today. And this will give us an idea where that center goes, because we know we have a perfectly centered item here. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Shift key, and this is intersecting perfect center. I'm going to do the same thing with the one on top. Hold down the Shift key and get those to intersect. Now this one needs to be filled with this darker blue. So there we go. Now this overlaps slightly, but it's not going to be a huge big deal, guys, if that's not exactly perfect. But we'll see what happens here. So let's turn off the template. And now we have these elements here. So we're going to grab these elements. Now I would not necessarily group them together. I suppose you could go into the topmost part and group all those objects. And, you'll have nested elements, nested layers. We're going to group that. So we have 2 elements grouped. And now we're ready to make the pattern. So we're going to grab this and go to, let's pull it up here for just a second. An Alt and Shift and click. That way, if I mess it up, it's not a problem. So we're going to grab this and turn it into a pattern. So I'm going to go to Object, Pattern, and Make. And it'll give me a kind of a preview of what it's looking like. It also tells me that it's parking this pattern within the swatches panel. And here's what the pattern looks like. Easy peasy, the work is done. So it's just a regular grid pattern. There's no shifting. I suppose if you wanted to shift it, you could go brick by row, and you might see then that elements shift a little bit, but we're just doing grid. It's also brick by column. So you can see how, oh wow, that's really neat there, every other one. So there's ways to do different types of patterns with the same symbols. So that's really cool. I kind of like that one, but we're doing the grid. I'm going to close this, click off of this. And the reason why I duplicated those up there is because I'm going to delete these. All that work and we're deleting them. It's okay, we got them. Now on this, we will just simply fill this pattern or this path with that pattern. So we may have to duplicate on exercise 3 one of the squares. So I'm going to unlock the squares, click on the one for square for exercise 3. Maybe double click because those are grouped. Edit, copy, and then double click, go to exercise 3, lock the squares, and go to edit, paste in front. And what it did is it threw it up here in isolation mode. So I'm going to grab that rectangle and drag it to exercise 3 at the top. And we'll toss this isolation mode in the trash can. Okay, so now we have an exercise 3. We have the rectangle that's copied and the same position. Now we're just going to go to the swatches panel and fill it. And there we go. That's done. As far as if it's in the exact same position as the other one, I'm not so concerned about that. I'm just concerned about you making a pattern and filling it. So if I were to turn on the template layer, turn off the exercise layer, you will see that perhaps it doesn't fill exactly the same way. Maybe because I drew the opposite. I did perhaps the snowflake on top of the trees, but that's not a big deal, guys. Don't worry about that. So we're going to turn that layer off and we are done with exercise 3. Pretty simple, straightforward, easy to manage. Now I would in exercise 3 go ahead and turn off the pattern elements, keep them, but turn those off. And then you can delete any extra paths that are left over. So here's a path that's left over. And it looks, oh, those might be, what are those? I'm not sure what those are. So, if there's anything extra and it seems to be Yeah, seems to be extraneous. Well, I'll just turn those off because it might be snowflakes. I'm not sure. Usually I delete them. All right, so that's exercise 3. And we'll move on to exercise 4 on another video.